Hello and welcome to this tutorial. We're going to be looking at everything to do with exporting and sharing media across projects and archiving in this section. So you've come to the point where you've done a load of work inside of Flame and now you want to kind of deliver that to the outside world, whether it's going to be for just final delivery or maybe you're going to be passing it on down the pipeline for grading or something like that. We need to get the media that you've worked on back out to the file system. We're going to do this in exactly the same way as we imported it. We're going to be using our Media Hub. So if you remember when we started at the beginning of this, we were dragging media into the desktop for the Media Hub. We're going to be dragging media out of the desktop into the Media Hub. Since we were last together, I've made up a couple more versions. So we've got a few more bits and pieces for variety to work with. I've got my original edit. So this is my full one. I've got a 15-second cut down, 30-second cut down. I've also made one that's just an extraction as well. So if I want to start getting these out of the system, I can come down to my Media Hub. This is my file system. Choose where I'm going to export it to. So I've got a little folder here called Export. Just going to click in there. And it's a simple case of we just pick up the clip or clips we want to export and we kind of just drop them into this window. And what you're going to get initially is probably a little window that looks a little bit like this. This is my export options. Now this covers pretty much all the formats that we're going to be doing. In the drop down at the top, you can do it as a movie, you can do it as a file sequence, audio only, or a sequence publish if we're going to interact with other systems, like if we're going to pass this on to another editing system or more likely a grading system. We'll look at what that does in a second. We probably want to show the advanced options because that makes it a little bit clearer what's kind of going on. So regardless of whether we're doing image sequence exports or MOVs, they will have a drop down of presets. Now you can select any one of these that you want. This will load up the default parameters. But if you want to sort of customize it, say for argument's sake, you want to add the sort of the username into this as well, or maybe the workstation, this then becomes a custom format preset, which we could go through and save so we don't have to repeat that process each time. I'm just going to be using the 422HQ format for a second. And pretty much that's about all we really need to know before we start hitting the export button. Now, there's a couple of options up here that you may want to sort of look at before you do that. Use top video track. So if we just cancel that for a second, come back to here. So remember in an earlier video, we were talking about this little cross piece, this little T-bar, decides on from what point in the timeline you're looking. So if you've got 3 layers and that's at the bottom, you're only looking at the bottom layer. Well, if you export with that T piece on the bottom layer of a 3-layer edit, unfortunately, it's only going to export that bottom layer. So if we come back to our Media Hub for a second and do this again, this will always force that T-bar to look from the very top of the edit. So that's probably a good one to have enabled as default, is use top video track, unless you've got specific circumstances where that is not the case. That's not what you want to do. You can also export between marks. So we can, if we're exporting a MOV or an image sequence, you don't have to export the whole length of the clip. You can export between a mark, an in and out mark from there as well. So that's pretty good. Maybe if you're writing back into image sequence, you only want to do a certain section, you could just overwrite or fix, for a fix or something like that. Now, by default, when we do an export, it will export in the background. There's a background process. You've probably seen some little notifications come up down here. And if actually we tap on that little arrow, you can kind of see that you get like a status panel. So anything by default will be a background export. But what we're going to do in this particular case is we're just going to select export in the foreground. That does a couple of things. Firstly, it's a little bit quicker because it's using the full resources of the box. It also means it ties the interface up, unfortunately, until that process is finished. But if that bothers you, you can use the default background export. The other thing is it's quite economical on the rendering. So if we're doing a background export, everything will have to be rendered in the timeline before it starts to actually write those frames out. When we're exporting in the foreground, it will actually do that process on the fly. So it kind of saves a little bit of disk space, and it also sort of speeds up that process as well. So once we're happy with our parameters, all we really do is have to hit the export button, and you can see what will happen. We'll get a little progress bar comes across as we write out that clip onto the system. And once again, we can browse directly from here. We can see that this is my full version. This is actually my 15-second version that I've just written out. That's pretty good. Now, obviously, if you wanted to do multiple exports, surprisingly, all you have to do is really multi-select in here, drag it into this window. And once again, we can kind of see now that 2 clips are selected to be exported. And then we hit the export button and it will go through and consecutively export those 2 clips. And this is also true if we were exporting in the background. We would just drag a load of clips down and it would then export all those in order, like in a queue, to the location in which we've dropped them. If you're exporting the background, you can actually quit the software and you don't have to keep the software open because it is actually a background task that just keeps on chugging away. So that's one way that we can export. Now, another thing is that if you're working and you actually start to build up a structure within your library of things that you want to actually export at the end of your job, it's actually really flexible. You can do that as well. So I've got a little library here called for export. What I'm going to come and do is I'm going to make up some subfolders down here as well. So I'm going to say this is going to be my house edits. And within that, there's going to be a structure. So we're actually going to make a folder for each. So we're going to do show house full. We're going to make up another folder that's going to be called 15 second. I'm going to make up another folder that's going to be called 30 second. And we're going to make up, surprisingly enough, you're probably way ahead of me, another folder that's just going to be called extract. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the respective clips. Maybe you're quite an organized person, and I'm going to drop the 15 second in there, 30-second clip in there, and the extracted clip in there. So if we kind of open these up, you can now kind of see that I've got in subfolders those respective edits, and all of those are contained in with a master folder called house edits. So, and this could be the case. You may need to have a quite a structured export file system when you're exporting your media. Depends on kind of where you're working or how organized you are. Now, if you do work like that, the good news is that you can actually drag that whole structure once again into the export window. It now knows that there are 4 clips to be selected. We're going to leave it all at the 422 settings, everything as was before, and we're just going to hit export, and it's going to sequentially go through and export those 4 clips. Now the nice thing about this is that when that process is finished, you can see that there's a folder here called house edits. If we just go down to our hierarchy, we can kind of spin that down and you can see that we've actually recreated that folder structure that we have from the library. So we've got our 15-second edit, our 30, our extract, and our show for house. So this is kind of a nice way of working quite orderly, and then at the end of the day all you have to do is drag out that one folder with all your exported media all queued up ready inside it, and it will recreate that file structure back in the back on your storage, which is a really nice feature. Now sometimes you may actually want to hand this off to grading maybe, or you're handing this off to another editorial process downstream, but you need to sort of not publish this out or write this out as one sequence. You need to actually export all the segments within the timeline independently and write down the metadata that's on those clips. So if we just look at our 15-second version, you can see that I've got 4 clips in here, and these clips all have their own sort of names and metadata, etc. If I was doing a conform that was then going to go after grading and I wanted to give them a nice editorial timeline with access to all the sources, how do we go about doing that? Well, this is where we use the publish function. So if I come down to my media hub for a moment, and I'm just going to come down here and I'm just going to make up a new folder called publish. And we're just going to go into that for a moment. And I'm going to drag out my 15-second version into that folder. If I take as an option sequence publish will do that for me. It's going to write out all the media as sources. It's going to maintain all the metadata, and you have the options of making an EDL or an XML depending on where it's actually going. So if we kind of look down some of the options, once again, there's a whole lot of presets already made for you. Most, you're going to find something here that's going to work for you. If it doesn't, then obviously you can take one as a base. You can see what it's doing, and then you can go through and you can kind of customize it. But say we're handing this off to Resolve for source grading, and we can do it in the ProRes. Once again, you can also do this as image sequences, but we're going to do it as movies for the time being. This will generate an XML for Resolve source grading, and it tells you the format and everything else. Now, once again, by and large, you don't really have to do much in here unless you you need to customize some bits and pieces. But generally, it's going to output the media, audio options. I'm not worried about this. This is going to be doing a publish for a flame. We just want to be worried about this for a moment. This is going to be passing on to Resolve. And all we have to do then is just kind of hit export, and it's going to go through. And it's going to create a folder that houses everything. We're going to open that up. You can see here we have an XML, which is going to put everything back together. And then in my media folder, you can see I've got my audio and I've got all of my clips, the sources, for them to be reconformed back in Resolve. So once again, that's a really nice flexible way of working. You can do a lot of work inside of Flame. You can publish that out for another product to take over, like you said, and do the grading side aspect of it. And maybe even then that will kind of round trip back into Flame for your final finishing. So that kind of really takes care of exporting. It really is very simple. There's no sort of like a dark art or mystery to it whatsoever. It's as simple as dragging things into this window, deciding where they're going to go and how you want to export that media. Now, the chances are that at some point you're going to have some material or some setups that live in another project, or maybe on another project on another machine that you'd like to access, or maybe you want to share some items out from your project as well. So the Media Hub also takes care of a lot of that as well. So once again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of save up my desktop here. Just going to overwrite that, and I'm going to quickly just clear my current desktop for a second. I'm going to start a job, but I know that I did some prep work, or I may have some elements or something that's going to be useful for me to use in this project living in another project on this machine, or like I said, it could be on another machine on the network. So how do we get access to those? Well, one way again is through the Media Hub. Now you can see that right at the top we've got some tabs up here. We've been working consistently with files coming in, files going out during this course of tutorials, but there's also projects and archives. So if we looked at our project tab, this is going to do a couple of things. We can sort of just come back up to the home here. It's going to show me all of my projects that are living on this machine. And if I was connected to a network with other machines, it would show me then all those other machines as well. And if I went into one of those machines, I could see all its projects. I'm working in a project at the moment, which is my Flame intro, and you never see the project that you're working on. But I did make up another one called Project 2. And once again, I'm going to change this to like a hierarchy. I'm going to go into Project 2, and you're going to see here is what I've got is literally access to my Project 2, my desktop that's currently loaded, and then also all the libraries that are saved within that project. So I can actually twirl down, I can see the contents of the desktop, I can see the clips, I can see the edits, and say, well, actually, this is going to be, actually, I want the computer stuff, so I want this computer and this computer, and I'm going to bring that to my project's desktop. And even if I sort of went down here, I can see inside of my batch with my batch iterations, I can see some work that I was playing around with. I've got some kind of like tracking stuff going on here and some comps, but also I can just sort of drag across the iteration. I can drag across the setup that I want. So we're not dragging media now, we're dragging that whole batch desktop. And once again, we can kind of drop that here, and now that's into my project. So if we come back to my timeline for a second, you can see these are the clips that I brought across. I've got some computer stuff here. The thing I'm going to be doing next is going to be a bit computer based, so there's some laptops, all very nice. And if I look at my batch that I dropped across, you can see here that this is my sources that I was working on. And if I go into my batch setup, there we go. I can see that was my iteration number 3, which was the last one, which looks kind of fairly good where I left it. So it's as simple once again as just literally dragging what you need from the Media hub, whether it's files, whether you're dragging files out to export, or whether you're actually dragging in clips and dragging setups from other projects. Now, just so you know what's going on here, if you drag media, setups, whatever from a project that lives on your own machine, all you're doing is you're making kind of a reference to that media. You're not copying the media at all. If you're dragging that from across a network, so if you're dragging it from another machine, then you're going to start up a background copy or a foreground copy, depending on how you choose your preferences, that will then make a copy of those clips and those setups on your local machine. So just bear that in mind. So the last thing we really want to kind of do now is think about what we would do if we want to finish a job. So we finished a job, we want to archive this job, and we probably want to get this job completely off the system, maybe put it into storage, maybe put it onto drive, put it on the shelf, but you don't want it on your system anymore. So we have a built-in process that we can call archiving. So I'm going to clear my desktop for a second. We're going to come back to here and we're going to load up this one again. So archiving is going to be exactly the same as anything else that we've done on this. It's very gestural, it's very drag and drop, but there's a few steps we need to start off with to create the archive and then decide on how and what we're going to archive into that. So once again, this process starts from the Media Hub, but this time we use the Archives tab. So once again, we're going to come into our storage media. We're going to go down to where all our bits and pieces are. I've made a folder here called Archive, which I'm going to enter. Now, at the moment, there's nothing there. There is no archive, there's no media, absolutely nothing. So the first thing we need to do in this particular case is kind of create an archive for everything to go into. So down the bottom on the archive interface, I'm going to create a new archive. It's by default going to take the project name, so Flame Intro Archive. It's going to tell me when the creation date was. And if I want to, I can segment the archive into more manageable bits. So it defaults to 1 gig, but I can sort of choose one of the presets from one of your most popular settings, or if you know that you're going to a particular file format that only supports a certain file size, you can go through and you can make it a custom size as well and tell it how many gigabytes. All it's going to do is it will reach that size and then it will segment into another part within that archive. So this is just deciding on the maximum size of each segment in the archive is going to be depending on how you're archiving that off. We're going to leave it as 1 gig default and we're going to create the archive. Now at this point we're actually in the archive. We've just created it in that location. It's empty at the moment, and now all we really have to do is decide on what we're going to archive off. Now you've got a couple of options here, but basically it falls into, do we want to archive the entire project, like literally everything that we've got in this one project, or do we just want to archive bits and pieces, the bits that we choose, a selective archive? Not really many options in here. This is going to give us an idea of what the archive size is and some information about when it's created. And in the archive options, defaults are that it's going to literally make a hard copy of everything into the archive. And at this stage, it's going to make an archive at the highest possible quality. So even if we've been working with compressed media, compressed file system, it's going to archive inside of here as uncompressed RGB raw files. So the archives could get quite big. Don't be worried about that. It just means you're not going to go through any kind of recompression process. The defaults are that it's going to literally cache and copy everything that you're currently using, even if it's still soft import. It will make a hard copy into the archive. It's going to include all the versions that we've made. So we've got the opportunity to do versions within Flame as well in timelines and segments. And it's going to include renders. So this is going to be like the maximum size of your archive. Now you've got a couple of options down here where you can say, well, I don't want to cache anything, in which case it's going to be making a link. So, it's going to leave a majority of your media on the file system, and it's just going to make links into the archive. The downside of that is that if you move your media or you rename it when you restore your archive, maybe things are not exactly going to match up and all come together quite nicely. So bear that in mind if you're going to be turning that off. You want to make sure that you archive off your source material separately, however you do that. You can also cut your size of the archives down if you maybe exclude the renders. So once again, everything that we do in Flame, if we're doing that process in the timeline, is making up like a render in the background. So we could save possibly quite a space by excluding those renders. And then there's a whole bunch of options if we kind of turn cache media off on archive, whether we include renders and cache, exclude source media, exclude renders and cache. So quite a lot, but basically with this switched off, chances are you're not going to be archiving much media. If it's switched on, you're going to be archiving a lot. Some of the options over here are to do with when you're transferring archives to other machines, and by and large, you probably just want to leave these at default unless you've got specific circumstances where you want to use them. So if I was just saying I just want to archive some certain bits, maybe I like these 3 edits, I can just drag those in and it will start to build a list of things that are pending to archive. And down here, it's going to give me an estimation on how much space that's going to take up on my file system. You can see that these 3 edits are going to take up around about 10.5 gig because they're going to be big uncompressed RGB files. So these are files. There's nothing to stop me from kind of grabbing a whole desktop in a library, and I can drop that in and add to it as well. Or I could even, just kind of expand these out a little bit. And let's find, there you go. This is a batch setup, or I could even just drop a batch setup in there as well. And you can see all it's doing is it's just adding it to a list of things that are going to finally get archived when I hit the archive button down here. So this is what's going to be termed like as a selective archive. If we make a bit of a mistake, we don't want all this stuff in, we can just clear that list. The other option is you can just let Flame do the whole thing in one go. You can go through down here and you can archive the project and then close the archive. Now, archive project, you don't really get a choice of what you're really doing at all. You are archiving absolutely everything. So this is going to be one that's the maximum size that you're going to experience on your file system. It's literally going to be everything in your project is going to be put in. It will give you a warning before it goes through a process, and it will give you a size estimate, whether you want to continue or not, and then you can work out if you've got enough space on your storage before you hit the go button. So just to step through this quickly, we're going to take some separate clips. We're going to drop those back in. I'm going to actually take my ships desktop, and I'm going to take a couple of individual batch setups. And when I'm kind of happy with all the bits and pieces that I've got there, all you have to do is hit archive. On the drop down, you can hit archive and close because you've got the chance to sort of append this. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to hit the archive button. And what it will do is it will go through. It's going to tell you how much it's writing out to the storage, and it's going to give you a rough time estimate of how long that's going to take. So when that process is finally finished, all of your bits and pieces will be inside of the archive. You see the archive session here. If you didn't do the option of archive and close, then just make sure that you close the archive file nicely. So just show you how you bring stuff back in. We're just going to come here. We're going to clear my current desktop. I'm going to spin all these up so we kind of don't get confused. We're going to go back to my archive. Double tap to open it up, and then we can spin that open. We can see the contents of the archive and decide on what we want to restore. So maybe I want my kitchen shot back in. I want a couple of these, and once again you can drag these kind of anywhere that you want. You could drag it into the library to restore whatever you want. When you're kind of happy with what you want to restore, whether it's a selective restore or a project restore, then you just go restore and close, and once again Flame will then bring those back in from that archive file and write it into the location where you've dropped them. Come back to my timeline. You can see now I've got those clips back here, and you can see once again I've got my kitchen batch set up as well. So that covers pretty much everything to do with file exporting. We've seen how we can share media across projects as well. And lastly, we see how when you've done everything you need to do in your project, how you can then archive off those media, those setups, either totally as a project archive or a selective archive, and then quickly how you restore things back. So I hope you've enjoyed this short introduction to Flame. It hasn't actually been that short. There's been quite a lot of stuff in there, and hope it's given you sort of a food for thought, and also encouraging you to sort of roll your sleeves up, dive into software and explore and discover things for yourself. So once again, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again in the future with some more tutorials around Flame.